serving of food. I think the Minister for Health says that they have no concern in relation to restaurants, so could pubs do the same but without food? It strikes me that this could be a way forward in the weeks ahead. In addition, I think we need to look seriously at how a specific stimulus plan for the tourism and hospitality sector is needed. You'll be aware, Tánaiste, or you may be aware that we recently in Sinn Féin published a proposal amounting to a stimulus of €860 million to provide every adult in the state with a voucher worth €200 and every child in the state with a voucher worth €100 to be spent in businesses in the tourism and hospitality sectors. It would provide a big boost to counties and regions heavily dependent on tourism and hospitality, as well as supporting hundreds of thousands of jobs. This plan would also give workers and families a welcome option for a breakaway or days away after what has been an extraordinarily difficult period. Similar stimulus plans have been introduced around the world. Italy has a similar plan to encourage people to holiday at home. Vienna has given residents vouchers for restaurants in the city. The United States is distributing billions of dollars in stimulus checks directly to residents. This is a worthy investment, in my view, in terms of jobs in businesses and in communities. And without that intervention now, Tánaiste, thousands of jobs could be lost permanently, costing the state considerably more in the long run. So can I ask you, with the government due to publish its July stimulus plan in the coming days, if this scheme will be considered as part of a package, or a scheme like this will be considered part of the package of measures that you would announce?
Thank you, Deputy Doherty. Tánaiste.
Thanks, Deputy. First of all, I very much agree with you in that the tourism, hospitality, travel sector is a huge part of our economy. A 250,000 more people working in that sector, and a sector that's very dependent on travel, both international travel and domestic travel. And it is a sector that was hit first, hardest, and will probably be affected the longest as a result of this pandemic. And I know that a lot of people, people running pubs, people running hotels, will be very disappointed at the decision that government took last night, but will acknowledge that the decision was taken for good reasons, and that was reasons of public health, as you acknowledge in your contribution. In terms of how we support these sectors and how we save jobs, different countries will adopt different approaches. And when you compare packages, I think you need to compare them in the round. So, for example, in the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland, where your party is in power, you're ending the wage subsidy scheme in October, but instead are doing something on VAT for 1 month. Our approach may be a different one. We may decide that the best way to protect jobs is to continue the wage subsidy scheme beyond October. So, you know, when you talk about what different countries do, I think you have to look at it in the round. And the focus that we've taken to date is the wage subsidy scheme, because that's the most effective way to keep people in work and targets those businesses most affected. We've warehoused tax liabilities, brought in the pandemic unemployment payment, really for reasons of social solidarity in the initial phase of this pandemic, much greater payments than have been the case in other countries, including north of the border, and as well as that, frozen commercial rates or waived commercial rates for 3 months. In terms of what's planned in the July stimulus, that's not decided yet. It will be decided on Monday, with the view to being published on Tuesday or Wednesday. And we are looking at all sorts of different potential actions, and I don't want to speculate on them too much here because that may then raise expectations that can't be met. But the kind of things we are examining, for example, is whether the commercial rates waiver should be continued for a longer period of time. That saves money business. It saves money for business in terms of reducing their costs. Whether the wage subsidy scheme should be continued and open to groups of workers that are not currently covered, those who weren't on the payroll back in February, like seasonal workers, for example. Also, whether we should do something around the Restart Grant. And the Restart Grant has been very beneficial for a lot of businesses, but some didn't qualify, and some have pointed out, rightly so, to give the other side of the coin, that the Restart Grant north of the border is more generous than it is here. So they're the kind of things that we're examining.
Deputy Doherty.
Yeah, thank you, Ceann Comhairle and Tánaiste, and Deputy Louise O'Reilly will be launching our proposals that contain all of those measures in terms of wage subsidy scheme, Restart Grant rates, waivers, later on to support SMEs. But in terms of the tourism sector, and you've acknowledged, and rightly so, that it is the worst hit, it will be the longest that will suffer as a result of COVID-19. And no matter what type of supports we put in, we have to, in my view, stimulate demand, because 10 million overseas tourists aren't coming to the country this year. Many of them won't be coming next year. It's not going to be possible to replace that demand with domestic consumption, but we need to try, and a voucher scheme is a way to do that. It's a cost-efficient way, in my view. 23% of every euro that's spent in the economy and tourism comes back to the state. But also the key here is, let's get as many people as possible off the pandemic unemployment payment. Let's get them back into the tourism service, the accommodation.
Thank you, Deputy Doherty.
And can I ask you maybe to answer the question on, could pubs operate like restaurants without food? Because we know that a meal in itself, whether it's €9 or €12, is no defence to COVID-19. So is that a potential solution?
All right, you've made your point, Deputy. Thank you, Tánaiste.
I think in relation to stimulating demand, there is a strong case for putting in place actions that would help to stimulate demand. But we need to be honest with people too. Stimulating demand is going to be no good to a pub that is closed, or a nightclub that is closed, or to a wedding venue that can't hold weddings of more than 50 people. So it has its benefits, it also has its limitations. I've no doubt that Deputy O'Reilly will produce a very long shopping list of everything that we could do, and I'd say up until yesterday she would have said she'd pay for it with the money from Apple, but of course we know that kind of stuff isn't realistic. There is a limit to how much you can have in any stimulus package. We do want to keep borrowing to no more than €30 billion this year. We'll take about 50 billion in tax, we'll spend 80. A €30 billion deficit is pretty huge, maybe the biggest we've ever had. So, you know, we are spending a lot of money, we are borrowing a lot of money. That's the right thing to do, but it's wrong to suggest that money is unlimited and you can just do everything on your list. You actually do have to prioritise. It's not credible just to produce a very long list every day and add to it.
Thank you,
in terms of your question on pubs, NEFIT haven't been asked to advise on that. I do understand the point you're making. I think it is a valid one, that if you could open pubs with very strict social distancing, that could potentially work. The problem that we have seen, though, with alcohol is that when people consume alcohol, and we've seen this on a number of occasions, whether it's in house parties, whether it's on the streets, even when it's in restaurants, when people are consuming alcohol, it is very hard to maintain social distancing. And that's a real
Thank you,
difficulty. And that is one thing that's fundamental to pubs. They are ultimately about serving alcohol.
Thank you very much. The regional group, Deputy Michael Lowry.
Tánaiste, although there is a major focus on travel, there is a sector of the industry that is facing extinction unless they receive urgent funding. Ireland's 190 licensed travel agents are currently watching their business fail, and unlike the other SMEs, they have received little or no assistance. I've been in correspondence with you about this issue. Industry projections estimate that as a result of the advice not to travel abroad, travel agents overall will lose 120 billion of projected earned income, which comes largely from commissions and service fees. Without the benefit of TWSS, many travel agents would already have closed their doors, as turnover is down by 90%. All earned income to date from advance bookings is handed back in refunds, resulting in negative trading. Advance bookings are practically at zero, so businesses are looking down a black hole towards the rest of 2020 and for the first quarter of 2021. Travel agents earn income when consumers pay the balances. Unlike the domestic tourism industry, they cannot benefit to the extent from staycations. Outbound travel agents have no fallback. However, outbound and inbound tourism rely on each other to generate passengers for airlines to justify operations. Multinationals and SMEs depend on travel agents to properly manage their costs. Outbound travel agents also sell European holidays in the UK market and bring meetings, conferences, sports groups and a host of other visitors into Ireland. Travel agents are not arguing against government advices, but it is arguing and concerned about the unintended consequences that are putting them in jeopardy. Greater assistance is urgently required. Travel agents were excluded from applying for the online retail scheme in the first round of grants, as they are considered as only providing a leisure service. Travel agents should not be excluded from the upcoming round of financial support for SMEs or from applying for certain grants that may evolve due to a misconception of the level and type of businesses they provide. In summary, Tánaiste, the government advice is not to travel. Thousands of people who follow that advice have cancelled flights and holidays. Most of these cancellations are package holidays, which include flights, transfers and accommodation. We have a ludicrous situation that under a European Union directive, the travel agent is legally responsible for the refund of the entire package. This is simply not financially sustainable. It's a travesty and incredibly unfair to expect travel agents to shoulder the burden of this financial outlay. It will force them into liquidation. Ironically, the travel agent bonding system to protect consumers when agencies collapse only becomes active and effective after a travel agency goes into liquidation. The travel agent and thousands of consumers across Ireland are caught stranded in the middle between a European Union directive and government travel advice. So, Tánaiste, this is a matter that needs urgent attention and correction.
Thanks very much, Deputy. I had a chance to speak briefly to the President of the Irish Travel Agent Association on a Zoom call the other day, and Minister Naughton, whose responsibilities cover aviation and international travel, will be meeting with the association in the next couple of days to explore what specific supports we may be able to put in place for them. About 3,000 people across the country work in travel agents and tour operators. We all know these businesses. They're largely locally owned, often family owned. They tend to be an important feature on our high streets. While many people now book online, lots of people still use travel agents and tour operators, and that includes inbound as well as outbound travellers. We want to make sure that they survive and that they're able to do well again when we get past this pandemic. They do benefit from a lot of the actions the government has already put in place. For example, the wage subsidy scheme. They would almost all benefit from that because their turnover has gone down by so much. We also brought in the refund credit note scheme so that people would get vouchers or credit notes rather than cash refunds in an effort to assist the sector so that it didn't collapse, so that people are ultimately entitled to the cash if that's what they want. They have had their commercial rates waived and some are eligible for the Restart grant once they get started again. And we will see what else can be done, both in terms of the July stimulus that's happening next week, and also if there's anything in particular we can do for the sector, and that's what Minister Naughton will be exploring with them. You have written to me, as you said, about the online retail scheme. That does fall directly under my responsibility, as it's an Enterprise Ireland scheme. That funding is all drawn down now, but if we are able to reopen the scheme, I do take your point. I think you make a valid point that they should be included in that too.
Lowry.
Tánaiste, could I raise a separate issue but connected? We have thousands of people in Ireland at the moment who booked flights with the airlines to travel. On government advice, they have taken the decision not to travel. We now have a situation where airlines have had the use of people's money for a considerable period of time. Because the flights are not cancelled, they're not able to recoup their money. And when they go to change the date, the only option they have is to change the date. When they go to change the date forward, the airlines is charging them as much as they paid for the original ticket. Now, this is total exploitation of a dominant position by the airlines, and I would ask Tánaiste that you'd intervene with the airlines and allow a situation to develop where airlines only charge a nominal fee for changing the date forward.
Thank you, Deputy Lowry. Tánaiste to conclude.
Thanks, Deputy. I'll certainly take that up in my engagement interaction with the major airlines. Government advice, really since the middle of March, has been to avoid non-essential travel off the island, but I appreciate that there are some people who would have booked long before March who now find themselves in a very difficult position. Just in relation to international travel advice, what I should restate is that government advice is that nobody should engage in non-essential travel off the island, and anyone coming into the island, whether it's for essential or non-essential reasons, should not quarantine but restrict their movements. for 14 days. That's staying at home and only going out for essential supplies and for exercise. I see the term quarantine, self-isolate used incorrectly and regularly. The advice is to restrict your movements for 14 days. And that's for anyone coming into the island, with a very small number of exceptions, such as pilots, transport workers, cabin crew and diplomats. However, on Monday we will have a green list of countries, a list of countries with an incidence of the coronavirus that is similar to ours, and we will be able to update our advice in relation to those countries, and that will be different from the general advice for countries not on the green list.
Thank you. The third question comes from the Rural Independent Group, Deputy Michael Healy-Rae.
Yeah, thank you very much, Councillor. Tánaiste, first of all, what I wish to bring to the floor of the House today is the government decision on the medical advice to keep our pubs closed until the 10th of August. I really think this is a retrograde step. I think our publicans, our hard-working publicans, and very importantly, their customers, are being treated very unfairly. At the beginning, in the interest of keeping everything proper and correct, I wish to obviously declare that I'm a connected person to a person who owns a pub. And I believe that our public houses have served us very well back over the years. I believe that the Vintners Association are a very responsible organisation representing very responsible small business people who were very much looking forward to, on the government's word, opening next Monday. Remember what you have done to them, Tánaiste. Their pubs are now stocked. Work rosters have been organised. People have organised babysitters. They're ready to open their doors and turn on their lights. And last night, you pulled the rug out from underneath them. Now, I want to look at the reasons why. If you look at what NPHET are saying, they are saying they've looked internationally at what has happened in public houses throughout the rest of the world, and they're just saying when they opened, there was a spike or an increase in the cases of the virus. But we're missing one very important point here. We've always said that the Irish pubs are unique. Our country pubs are unique. They're catering for smaller groups of people. They know their customers. And all they wanted to do was open up in a small way that the local people could come in from the countryside and have a drink. You must remember there's an awful difference between Dame Lane and Ballinskilligs, or between Dame Lane and Portmagee, or any other part of the county that I represent. And what my point is, that I think you have really missed the bigger picture here, in that by opening these pubs, you would not, absolutely would not have increased the occurrences of the virus. Because can I ask you this question, Tánaiste? And on the record, I would like for you to explain to me this. What is the difference between a person inside in a public house with a pint of Guinness in this hand and a toasted cheese sandwich in this hand, and a person inside in another pub with a pint of Guinness and no toasted cheese sandwich? Could you please give me the medical, you are a doctor, could you please explain to me why that poses a public health danger to that person drinking that pint and eating that sandwich or not? Actually, it is a crazy decision by the government. I really feel very bad, and I wanted today, on behalf of every publican, be he a man or a woman or a younger person that was in charge of a pub that was looking forward to opening next Monday, I want to tell you that they are extremely angry about the way they've been treated by the government. And these are responsible people. These are people who are more interested in public health than anyone else, because remember, they've been minding people's health for many, many years, because they're in charge of what I would call well-run public houses.
Thank you, Deputy
where they know
Healy-Rae.
their customers, and they wanted to mind them, and they were going to mind them next Monday, but now you've pulled the rug out from underneath them.
Thank you very much, Deputy. Tánaiste.
Thanks. Thanks, Deputy. Look, I can understand what a blow and what a hammer blow this news is for publicans, for people who run pubs, nightclubs, other venues who had expected and had hoped that they would be able to open next Monday. And I don't think I'm the only person in this House who is looking forward to Freedom Pints next week. But unfortunately, that isn't possible. And it isn't possible for a good reason. And that reason is that the incidence of the virus in Ireland has increased. It's still very low, roughly 20 cases a day, 4 per 100,000, the 8th or 9th lowest out of 31 countries in Europe. But the trajectory was a matter of concern. It was going in the wrong direction. And that has not been largely due to international travel, despite all the focus on it. It's been 90% due to our own behaviours, people in close contact with each other in confined indoor spaces, breathing on each other, coughing on each other, touching each other. And as a result of that, we've seen a number of clusters, often linked to house parties and linked to social engagements. And that's a matter of concern. And that's why NEFID gave government the advice it did, and government acted on that, which was to defer the opening of pubs and nightclubs at least until the 10th of August, and then to bring in some new rules around house parties as well. And that is to say that you shouldn't invite more than 10 people to your house from no more than 4 households. And that is the advice. And we know this from all over the world and from China and from Asia, that actually it's not outdoor gatherings, for example, like what happened at Dame Lane, which shouldn't have happened, where the virus spreads. It's actually in indoor, small, confined spaces with 10 and 15 people passing it to each other through close contact and being together for a prolonged period of time. And that is house parties. That is small pubs, unfortunately. And that is the truth of it. And it's also potentially restaurants as well, if restaurants act as if they are pubs and concentrate more on selling alcohol rather than people having their meal, a bit of alcohol, and getting out within an hour and a half.
Deputy Healy-Rae.
Thank you very much, Tánaiste. What you have done now is you've created another problem. These small businesses that were looking forward to standing on their own legs next Monday and opening their doors, now they're going to be faced with the financial burden of another 25 days with their doors closed. So what I will be asking you now, Tánaiste, is what proposals have you in government? And I'm not talking about loans, I'm talking about grants and substantial assistance to be made available to these businesses to allow them to carry on their businesses when you eventually decide to let them open. Now you're saying the 10th of August, and what I've got many calls late into last night and very early this morning, people saying, well, how sure are we now that they're actually going to allow us, because they've broken their word to us already. You raised their hopes, which was a horrible thing to do. And the message that has gone out now around the world is you can come in from a hot spot, but you can't have a hot drop, because you've left our doors closed. And I think it's a poor decision. And if I thought that medically it was a good idea, of course I'd be behind it, but I'm not. And finally, what has to be said is, we now, in particularly in rural Ireland, we feel as though we are being blamed and getting the brunt of the anger that government had when they saw what went on in Dame Lane.
Thank you, Deputy.
And any decisions that you make with regard to house parties, we'd welcome anything like that, anything that would control that sort of nonsense. But please, for God's sake, recognise the fact that our publicans are responsible people who run good houses.
Now the time is up. Tánaiste, to conclude on this matter.
Thanks. Thanks very much, Deputy. And I've no doubt that the vast majority of publicans in our country are responsible people and people who want to open their businesses, and I want their businesses to open too. But I do need to be clear. What we're saying is that pubs and nightclubs will not open any sooner than the 10th of August. We're not saying they will open on the 10th of August. We're saying they will open no sooner than the 10th of August. And it will depend on the numbers and on how the virus behaves, to use Tony Hoolan's term, between now and then. And when we published the plan, and I was the one who published it, the Taoiseach at the time, to reopen business and society, we made it very clear on day one that this was a plan that could be accelerated if things were going in the right direction, could be paused if things were going offline, and reversed if needed be. And we're always upfront about that from day one. In terms of the help that we can offer pubs to open when they do reopen, the wage subsidy scheme is in place and we intend to extend that. They don't have to pay commercial rates, and we're looking at whether we can extend that too, and they will benefit from the Restart grant. And I'm looking at whether we can make that Restart grant better and more attractive, particularly for those who need it the most, which are the hospitality sector, including our pubs.
Thank you, Tánaiste. We move now to the independent group, and Deputy Thomas Pringle, please.
Thank you, Ceann Comhairle. Tánaiste, I'd like to ask you as well about the July stimulus package, which we all know is needed to assist businesses and the reopening of the economy over the months ahead. And I think we all agree on that. What I want to ask you about is what businesses are expected to do for the state in return for all the support that the state has given to them. I do believe that it is a two-way street, and it is not simply enough that they come out of the crisis in reasonable shape. I think that the state has to be in reasonable shape as well. And in return for the support that we as a state are giving to them, they need to support the workers that make their business a success. I do not believe that a business can survive without the support of its workforce, and indeed it is the workforce that makes a lot of businesses viable. It is not simply that supporting entrepreneurs or business people that we will recover, but it is also by supporting workers and linking the survival of workers and their families to the success of the state. Too often in the last couple of weeks, as people are returning to work, I am hearing stories of businesses using the crisis to reduce wages without any consultation. In one business, management have made many people redundant, are availing of the wage subsidy for the remainder of the employees, and are also using the crisis as well then to reduce the remaining wages by 10% for everybody across the board, and the wages of workers that they are already getting the wage subsidy for. In another employment, management have taken on a new policy where all the workers return to work for the wage subsidy alone. While that may be okay, as you said to me previously, I think that it is a betrayal of workers and indeed of the state as well. We need to get to a new way of thinking in this country, one where we can acknowledge that business is important for the success of the economy, but an engaged workforce is important for the success of business, and I think that is key. I believe that you and the government can make that happen, and after all, I know that you have the well-being of our people at heart. My question to you is simple. Will you make the job stimulus package work for workers as well, making sure that they will be able to survive as well as their employment? Thank you.
Thanks, Deputy. And the answer to your question is yes. If you look at what we've done so far, announced a package of roughly 12 billion to respond to the coronavirus. That's, leaving aside the health costs, about 12 billion in terms of supports for business and employees. Not all of that has been drawn down yet, but the bulk of it that has been drawn down is the wage subsidy scheme, which subsidises the wages of workers, and the pandemic unemployment payment, which provides a welfare payment to people who have been laid off. The vast majority of the money that we've spent so far has been targeted at people who have either lost their jobs or people whose jobs only exist now because they're being subsidised. The amount that we've given to business in grants and loans is much less than that. And I think we need to do better actually in terms of the grants and loans that we give to business, and we intend to do that next week. But the focus has very much been on people who've lost their jobs and making sure that more people don't lose their jobs. And I do think businesses do a lot for us already. They do create a lot of employment and they pay a lot in tax, and that's why we're able to fund our education system, our health system, our justice system, public infrastructure, everything else, because of all the taxes that business pay. And I might be wrong about this, and there may be exceptions, but I don't really think that there are very many employers in this country who are taking advantage of this crisis to reduce people's wages or terms and conditions. There may be examples, and we need to expose those people and take them on. But I think in the vast majority of cases where employers are seeking pay reductions, it's because they have no choice. Their business is down 50, 60, 70%. They're going to be in a loss-making position this year. And in order to survive, part of what they have to do is reduce their costs. And that's very regrettable where that has to happen. But it has to be better than the business failing and all of those people being laid off.
Deputy Pringle.
Thank you. Thanks, Tánaiste, for your answer. But business people staying at work and for wages that they can't survive on and their families can't survive on isn't good for them either. And I think what we need to do is change the dynamic where it's a businesses in partnership with their workers will survive, and that is the reality. And Tánaiste, you have consulted and met with IBEC, the Small Firms Association, ISME, Chambers Ireland, SME Recovery Ireland, and also a large range of state bodies including Enterprise Ireland, Local Enterprise Offices, Fáilte Ireland, the Strategic Banking Corporation of Ireland, the Irish Strategic Investment Fund, the Central Bank, Microfinance Ireland and the Credit Review Office. But you should be meeting with workers as well and workers' representatives, and then I think you will hear the story of businesses that are capitalising on the crisis and making workers pay and cutting wages as an excuse. And there's no doubt that a workplace might have to reduce wages, but they should be doing that in consultation with their workers and recognising that their workers are vital to the survival of that workplace. And that's what we as a state should be doing as well, and we should be creating that dynamic. And I would ask you and ask your government to actually start that ball rolling and use the July stimulus to make that happen.
Thank you, Deputy Pringle. Tánaiste to conclude.
Thanks, Deputy, and I will be doing that next week. My meetings next week include meetings with unions, including the Irish Congress of Trade Unions, and I'll certainly listen to what they have to say in that regard. And my previous occupation, I would have done that regularly, and will do so in this role as well, because I am the Minister for Enterprise, Trade and Employment, not just Enterprise. And when I say that, I mean that. But, you know, we can change the dynamic and the philosophy all we like, and I understand what you mean when you say that. But there's one dynamic we can't change. For a business to survive, it has to take in more money than goes out. You know, that's the bottom line. A business might get away with running at a loss for a few months, maybe even a year or two. But fundamentally, for a business to be a business, for any business to survive, for it to have any employees at all, its incomings have to match or exceed its outgoings. And if it doesn't, it'll fail. And the business will close. And those people will lose their jobs. And we don't want that to happen.
Thank you very much, Tánaiste. That concludes Leaders' questions, more or less miraculously on time as well. Before moving on to questions on promised legislation, just a few housekeeping points. I'm conscious of the fact that we have many new members, so I should again maybe remind you we have 30 minutes for this section. The question should be on promised legislation or the programme for government, not anything else. The selection of deputies is based on the leaders of the parties and groups as per the rota, followed by everyone else on a first-come, first-served basis. Deputy Durkan, who was in the chair yesterday, got some pressure from members who weren't happy. Today, we have 52 names here before me. 26 carried forward from yesterday, 26 given today. I just want to assure you, whether you write to me, email me, come up to the platform and give me your name or send me a smoke signal, we won't be able to call all of the 52 people. And unless the people who are called adhere to the timeline, we'll get to even fewer members. Now, first up, Deputy Pearse Doherty.
Tánaiste, on the 26th of December last year, President Higgins signed into law a bill that I sponsored, the Insurance Contracts Bill. This was after 3 years of it being initiated in this House. It passed unanimously all stages of the Dáil and the Seanad, described as a game changer by the Alliance of Insurance Reform, by others as the most radical change in insurance law over the century. It shifted the balance away from the insurance companies in favour of the consumer. And you know, Tánaiste, in your role that hundreds of people, if not thousands, have made claims in terms of business interruption insurance. Many have been forced to go to the courts to vindicate their rights under their contracts, and that has been disputed by the insurance companies. My legislation would have cleared a lot of this up, because there is a section in the bill which says that any ambiguity in contracts have to be interpreted in favour of the consumer. So my question to you is this. The Minister for Finance engaged with major insurers at the start of the year. They told him they didn't want this bill implemented at this time, despite it unanimously passing these Houses, despite it over 3 years since it was introduced. He decided not to implement this bill. There's 10,000 people who've signed a petition calling for it. There's thousands of businesses who need it. When will all sections of this bill be implemented by the government now?
Tánaiste.
Thanks, Deputy. I'm afraid I don't know. I'll have to check that with the Minister of Finance or the Minister Fleming, who's now the Minister responsible for insurance, but I'll do that today.
Thank you,
and get you a further reply.
Thank you very much, Deputy Duncan Smith.
My question is in relation to the future of the temporary wage subsidy scheme and how it relates to applications for short-time work. I have clarity from your Minister for Social Protection that people who are working 30% of their hours and in receipt of the temporary wage subsidy scheme can apply for short-time work. So that's been made clear, but employers aren't signing the UB14 form, and that's happening in the aviation sector and in Aer Lingus. So I'm asking, can you and your government provide clarity on that? Allow the employers, or give clarity to the employers to sign that form, and let the workers take their chances with their intro office on that application, please.
Yeah, thanks, Deputy. Again, I'll have to check that out with the line ministers, but I will do so.
Gary Gannon.
Tánaiste, I want to take you back to a world pre-COVID-19 to February 2013. You'll remember your predecessor as leader of Fine Gael and former Taoiseach Enda Kenny made a very heartfelt and profound apologies to victims and survivors of the Magdalen laundry. In May of 2014 that year, that apology came with a suite of recommendations from Justice John Quirk on how we can memorialise and give basic provisions to survivors of Magdalen laundries. Many of them promises still haven't been met yet, and very few of them actually are contained in the programme for government. I want to ask the Minister, particularly in relation to recommendation 6 of Justice John Quirk's regarding memorialisation. Is that something you perceive being delivered upon in the lifetime of this government? Thank you.
And Tánaiste.
Yeah, thanks, Deputy. The short answer to your question is yes, I do. It may not be specifically referenced in the programme for government, but I know the new government will want to honour the commitments that the last government made to the survivors of the Magdalen laundries. Memorialisation is part of that. Exactly what form or shape that's going to take needs to be discussed, and needs to be discussed most particularly with the survivors themselves. And I know this is an issue that now falls to Minister Varadkar Gorman as one of his responsibilities, and I think perhaps he'll just need a few weeks or so to get on top of all those issues. But I know he's going to want to take that matter very seriously, and also he's going to be responsible for the report on the mother and baby homes, which will, I think, give rise to similar issues when that comes later in the year.
Thank you, Tánaiste. Deputy Boyd Barrett.
Thanks, Count Corley. Tánaiste, the temporary ban on evictions is due to expire on Monday. Now, there's been some indications that it's the government's intention to extend that, but I'd like to get confirmation that the government is going to do that. There are a lot of tenants out there who are very anxious. The idea, particularly with the direction of the virus at the moment, the idea that people would be evicted into situations of homelessness faced with the current pandemic is, to my mind, totally unthinkable, even from a public health point of view, never mind a moral point of view. I know in my own area a group of tenants who are facing their 4th eviction attempt by vulture funds trying to clear them out and essentially maximise the profits they can make, have been told by the PRTB their case is going to come up now in a few weeks' time. They've done nothing wrong. They need security. They are not going to be evicted in the midst of a pandemic.
Tánaiste.
This was discussed at Cabinet yesterday, so the temporary ban on evictions won't end on Monday. Minister Bryan will make an announcement on that in early course as to what his intentions are in relation to that, but it won't end on Monday. But as the Deputy will appreciate, the legal advice around this is very strong, that it can only be temporary and can't continue forever for reasons that are well rehearsed. So a medium-term solution is going to be needed, as well as a temporary extension of the ban.
All right, thank you.
Minister Bryan is working on that and will make a statement on it soon.
Deputy Verona Murphy, please.
Thank you, Count Corley. Tánaiste, I won't harangue you in relation to, you've had a lot of questions on the hospitality and drink sector, and I appreciate that you have an understanding. What I would say is that for the government to support and understand the hammer blow that was delivered, I'd ask you to support the sector's enterprises and the employees who have now been closed for over 16 weeks. And I'm asking you to confirm that as part of the July stimulus legislation, which will be brought in front of the House before the recess, can you reduce the VAT rate on the hospitality sector to include on-trade alcohol sales, as there are 266,000 jobs employed in the sector, 11% of our overall employees, 9,300 of which are in Wexford, which used to have 43 pubs, it now has 17. I'm asking the Tánaiste to confirm that. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Murphy. Tánaiste.
Thanks very much, Deputy. I can't confirm that at this point in time, because the decisions to be made in relation to what's in and not in the July stimulus won't be made until a Cabinet meeting on Monday or Tuesday. But we will make any announcements next week. I would make the point that a reduction in VAT is of little use to pubs that can't open. So the best thing we can do for that sector is to get the pubs open, because when your business is closed, you're not paying any VAT. And the best thing we can do to help pubs and other businesses that haven't reopened to reopen over the next couple of weeks is to go back to doing what we did really well as a country for a couple of months now, and that is the social distancing, it's the hand washing, it's the sneezing and coughing into a tissue, it's keeping a reasonable distance from other people, it's wearing a mask in public transport and in crowded indoor spaces. And if we get back to that, I think the number of new cases will level off. It'll stay at about maybe 20 a day, and that will allow us to proceed to phase 4.
All right, thank you.
And that's what we need
Tánaiste,
to aim to do.
Deputy Matthew McGrath.
Good. Taoiseach, the publicans and their families and their customers have been let down. They've actually been misled. You yourself, when you were Taoiseach, announced that you want them to reopen next Monday. You said it again last week in this House. You said it again this week in your role now as Tánaiste. Now we have a new Taoiseach, and he's been a failure to them, because why weren't they told earlier? Why were they forced into a situation where they bought their stock, paid for it, but refitted their pubs at an enormous expense, and had the mental health issues as well, and we're looking forward to seeing their customers and opening in a careful way, looking after staff, families and customers alike. This is unbelievable, and there have been a trick on them here. And if you're serious about the pandemic, why you, especially as Taoiseach when you were, refused to close the ports and airports, and still do? It sticks in their craw to see tourists coming in and they can't open their business. These are many valuable businesses. They pay tax, they pay rates, they pay VAT, they pay insurance, they pay light and heat, they pay everything, and they support all local initiatives as well. And their mental health is now deteriorating, and this is a real hammer blow. It's a real letdown, and they've been deceived.
Thank you. Deputy Fitzmaurice and Deputy Collins are offering on the same matter.
Thanks, Concorda. To follow up on that, Minister or Tánaiste, 10 people can meet in a house. If anyone had a bull's iota about rural Ireland, there are most pubs in rural Ireland during the week. You might get 4 or 5. And to stop them from opening is a hammer blow. I think you should relook at it again, because these pubs need to get up and running for the survival of the business itself, but also for communities throughout the rural areas. Thank you.
Deputy Collins.
Thank you, Tánaiste. Yesterday's decision was a disastrous decision for rural pubs. Rural pubs are being thrown in the same phase reopening as nightclubs. They're totally different type businesses. You have to get a common understanding of a rural pub, and you obviously haven't it up here for the last number of years. Rural pubs are being thrown in with urban pubs. A Dublin pub, it's a total different type of business, where 4 or 5 customers enjoy the drink in safe proximity. Now what you've laid is there's illegal bars opening up all over the place, in West Cork, in my own constituency. There's large house parties. Publicans listened to vibes they got from you, Tánaiste, and other politicians in government, and they assumed that you were going to open the pubs. Right, they bought their stock. They're down thousands of euros. They're going out of business. Many have pulled the plug as of your decision yesterday.
Time is up,
you
Deputy.
have to rescind that decision.
Deputy Martin Brown.
Thanks, Cathaoirleach. Look, while we accept the health advice yesterday, there's many pubs in my own Tipperary constituency who have been hit hard by the extended closures due to the COVID, and have now lost even more money by preparing for a scheduled reopening, which has now been cancelled again at a very short notice. Is the government going to provide support for them in the July stimulus package? And grants must be made available, and they must be made available fast for businesses like the pubs.
Thank you, Deputy. Tánaiste. Sorry, Deputy Danny Healy-Rae on the same matter.
Tánaiste, you are a Tánaiste for all the country, not just Dublin. If the public health officials don't understand rural people and rural publicans, you should. Same, is this another way of routing us out of rural Ireland? 'Tis fairly foolish to think that the virus can know whether you eat your dinner with your point or not. The people that I represent, generally, the most of them eat their dinner in the middle of the day. And the virus, I believe, doesn't know whether you're eating a meal with your point or not. It's fairly foolish to think that this is the story that's preventing us and rural publicans right around the rural areas from reopening. You are regarding and you are discriminating against rural publicans and rural people.
All right, thank you, Deputy. Tánaiste, can you deal with these matters, please?
Thanks, Deputy. I know the difference between a rural pub and a nightclub, and I used to have a very good social life, and I know about everything in between. Indeed, I've been in your pub, in fact. Very nice evening we had, or your family's pub, rather. But what I do need to say is that the assertion that was made is incorrect. We always said from day one that this was a plan that could be accelerated or slowed down or paused based on public health advice. And I understand and I feel for people who painted their pub in the last few days, were gearing up for the reopening, had ordered in stock and now find themselves in a difficult position. But let's try and get them open in 3 weeks' time. Let's not see it put off again. And the best way we can do that is to get the guidelines right, and that might be about limiting numbers to very small numbers, or it might be, or more importantly, about the right behaviours by us as a society in getting the virus back under control. Just on closing the ports and airports, I think we need to be frank about this. This is a virus that is going to go on for many more months, possibly for years. It's not feasible for us to cut ourselves off from the rest of the world, to stop Irish citizens returning home, to stop people from visiting their friends and relatives in other countries, to stop necessary... They haven't actually. No,
right,
no, they haven't. Hungary has natives to be this and see this. There's different rules for different countries.
We can't start having exchanges about this now. Thank you. The time is up, Tánaiste. Deputy Cathal Crowe, please. Deputy, please. Please, Deputy Cathal Crowe.
Thanks, Ceann Comhairle. Tánaiste, I just want to bring to your attention a very tragic case in County Clare, that of Jennifer Hines, 42 years of age, in permanent residency in Molam Nursing Home in Ennis. Jennifer suffers from cerebral palsy, has daily seizures, and she's one of those many young people that are in Irish nursing homes that this programme for government promises that they will eliminate that practice and get them into more suitable permanent accommodation where their needs can be met. It's a tragic case. She's a fish out of water. It's a perfect nursing home, but it's not perfect for her needs. And I would ask that the government might look at expediting these cases. They are tragic. We need to move them forward. Thank you, Tánaiste.
Tánaiste. Sorry, on the same matter? Yes, Deputy, can you... Deputy Wynne.
Deputy Wynne.
Yeah, please. My apologies, I just can't see you. You're so far away.
It's okay. Yeah, I just wanted to raise the same issue. I was also contacted by Jennifer Hines. She's only 42 years of age and she is now stuck in a nursing home. She's actually had her local authority housing removed from her. So on page 78 of the programme for government, it states that the government will eliminate the practice of accommodating young people with serious disabilities in nursing homes. I am asking you, Tánaiste, to ensure that this is done urgently in my constituency of Clare. Jennifer is in a bad situation where she can't, even because of her disabilities, engage in group activities. This needs to stop, Tánaiste.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Cullinan, are you on the same matter? No. Well, then there's nobody else on the same matter as this. No, there is, yes?
I can't go. If I could just raise, disabilities. On the disability section of the programme for government, when we're talking about that, page 90, just in relation, it's sort of connected to suspension of daycare and respite services for people with intellectual disabilities due to COVID-19. And I've been contacted, as many of my colleagues have, by many parents who are left dealing with children and sometimes adults with intellectual disabilities at home with little or no support. And I'm just asking the Tánaiste if you could address the issue as to when the daycare and respite centres will reopen, because they're reporting instances of regression and violence or being withdrawn or loneliness, and I think it's a matter of urgency at this stage.
Thank you, Deputy. Tánaiste, please.
I just want to thank deputies for raising the very important issue of younger people in nursing homes, and indeed younger people who are staying in hospitals for a prolonged period of time, months, years in some cases, because there's nowhere for them to go other than a nursing home, which is inappropriate. I think this is an issue we're going to talk about a lot in the next couple of months, and I know the Ombudsman is doing a report on this matter as we speak, and that's why a specific commitment is included in the programme for government. I'm sorry to hear about Jennifer's situation. I don't want to comment on an individual case without having information on it, but I do know that there are thousands of younger people in Ireland who are living in nursing homes with older people. I'm sure they get very good care, but it's just not right, and I've seen this. You go into a nursing home, all of the activities are designed for older people. You see a young person stuck there with them. It's really heartbreaking. And I know from my own experience as a doctor a long time ago that we often have younger people in a single room in a hospital or in a hospital bed for months and months because there is nowhere for them to go. And that's why we have a specific programme for government commitment to deal with this. And it may need a mix of solutions, obviously much enhanced home care and adaptations to homes so that people can return home.
All right, thank you,
In some cases,
Tánaiste.
it may mean specific homes for younger people. Won't be a problem solved quickly, but it is on our agenda, and I promise you that.
Thank you very much, Deputy Pat Buckley.
The last 3 years raising it is the issue with school transport and catchment areas. In East Cork, we have a problem with school places, so some people have to travel outside their catchment area, and it's their only option to get a school place. But when they go for the school transport, they fall outside their remit and they end up having concessionary tickets. They're not covered under the medical card, and it's causing immense stress. And we've raised this over the last number of years. Is there any common sense approach, or who can we speak to address this issue? Because children are being stressed. They only have an option of one school on the opposite side of East Cork, and they're being punished because they will not qualify for the free transport. The buses actually are demanding the €350 payment as it is now, and they're still unsure if even they're going back to school in August. Is there anybody or any way of, I suppose, reviewing these circumstances? Because this has been ongoing for the last 3 years and is causing immense stress to families and school children.
Tánaiste.
Thank you.
This is a matter for Minister Foley, and I know representing Kerry, I'm sure she's very familiar with school transport and the issues that arise around that. It's never a problem easily solved. We've changed the rules on a few occasions. You change one rule, you create a new anomaly or a new problem somewhere else, and then there's the whole difference between people who are entitled to a school pass and those who are not but receive it on a concessionary basis. It's one of those ones that I think will never be fully sorted, but if there are improvements that we can make that don't cost too much, we're willing to make them.
Thank you, Tánaiste. Deputy Paul Donnelly.
Carla. On page 73 of the programme for government, there's a promise to develop a carers proposal that will provide a core budget for service for carers across the state and also ensure that the most effective interventions are provided for each individual. I just want to give a couple of examples of 3 people in our constituency, Tánaiste. Alan, who loves the freedom of walking to his local centre down in the Blakestown, which has been closed during the COVID pandemic and hopefully will be opened up in September, but is really missing that. James is 5 years of age, lives in Cardiff, but there are no services, bus services, so his mother has to pay €70 per day to get down to the Navan Road. And then there's Carl, who's 32 and up in Little Pace, and who is desperately missing his friends in that service. So, Minister, look, I know there's promised legislation on all of these things around carers and disability, but they really need their services open now. They really do. They are really struggling. So I would urge any action that could be taken immediately.
Thank you, Deputy.
Thanks very much, Deputy. This is something that is very much on the agenda of government. We do want those services to be open as soon as possible. We'd anticipate that they should be open certainly no later than end of August, September, but I know a lot of people want them open right away, but there are different circumstances in different centres, and you need different solutions at different times. But I totally hear what you're saying, and I'm aware of individual cases as well, and it's something that I know my colleagues are working very hard on.
Deputy Christopher O'Sullivan.
Thank you. Tánaiste, page 40 of the programme for government refers to investment in wastewater treatment. And in our towns and villages in particular, we need that investment now more than ever. I know that you're familiar with Kinsale, Tánaiste. Near Kinsale, there's a small village called Belgooley, where the residents of that village are having to close their windows and doors because of the foul stench coming from a treatment plant that clearly doesn't work. In the village of Shannon Vale, which is near my hometown of Clonakilty, there's a black liquid coming up through the surface of an area where children should be at play. They've had to cordon it off. So, look, I suppose what I'm asking is, one, would you comment on the future investment of wastewater treatment, particularly in our towns and villages? And secondly, would you please look into those 2 individual cases for me? I don't expect you to have any answers in great detail on them, but if you give me assurance as Tánaiste that you would see that someone would look to address them, because Irish Water's response to date has been wholly inadequate. Thank you.
Tánaiste.
Thanks, Deputy, for raising this matter. There is a very extensive multi-billion euro capital programme which Irish Water is implementing on an ongoing basis. Huge improvements have been made in recent years in terms of our water quality and reducing unaccounted for water and reducing the number of boil notices and so on, but there's a huge amount still to be done because of the level of underinvestment that occurred for a very long time prior to the establishment of Irish Water. But I know this is going to be a priority for Minister Bryan. I'll say to him that you raise this and ask him to come back to you on those particular places.
Thank you, Tánaiste. Deputy Johnny Mythen.
I'd like to raise an issue under the programme of government on page 87 under family carers. Tánaiste, there's been no increase in family carers allowance since 2008. There's been no review since 2005. Will the Tánaiste please consider home carers tax credits to be made available to single carers who work part-time while also caring for a dependent person? As at present, this is only available to married couples and jointly assessed couples, which in my view is of a discriminatory nature.
If my memory serves me correctly, that the carers allowance was increased last year. It wasn't increased this year, but it was increased last year, and I think each of the 3 years before that. And the respite care grant, which was turned into the care support grant, was restored back to what it was prior to the last financial crisis. On the tax credits, I'll have to come back to the Deputy, and that would be a matter for the Minister of Finance, but we'll certainly consider an increase for the budget in October.
Thank you very much, Deputy. Trisha Ryan.
I wish to ask if you will introduce legislation to give effect to the 2008 court recommendation in relation to the pension rights of community employment supervisors. There isn't a village in the country that doesn't benefit from CE scheme workers. The value of the work they do far outweighs the financial reward they receive. They keep the community groups alive in rural areas in particular. I recently met with CE supervisors in Kildare town. The work they do is invaluable to towns like Kildare, Newbridge, Monasterevin, Portarlington and Rathangan, and the workers need to get what they deserve. More than 1,200 community employment scheme supervisors have been overseeing 900 state-funded services, ranging from childcare to Meals on Wheels for almost 30 years. Their job is all about more challenging as we hover on the verge of full employment, as they deal with people who have been left behind by so-called recovery. Tánaiste, I'm asking that you please give them some hope and give them what they're entitled to. Garth Maggle.
Thanks, Deputy. This is an issue that I'm familiar with. It's been going on for a long time, and we'd very much like to see a solution. But I don't think the solution is going to be a legislative one. That Labour Court recommendation called upon the employer at the time to establish a pension scheme. The government, the state, is not the employer of CE supervisors. So it wasn't our responsibility to establish a scheme. And of course, had there been a scheme, it would have been expected that those CE supervisors would have paid into the scheme, and they didn't. And that's the crux of the issue. We're not in a position to give a state pension, well, sorry, not a state pension. Anyone who pays PRSI is entitled to a state pension, and they are entitled to a state pension, but we're not in the position to give an occupational pension to people who didn't pay into it. And if we open that door, there will be no end to it. Public service pensions only go to public servants, and occupational pensions only go to people who paid into them. And if we open that door, I think there's no end to the level of knock-on claims. But perhaps we can come up with some solution that is not a pension, and we're open to that.
Deputy Darren O'Rourke. Pardon? There is, and I should have called you, and I will in a minute. My apologies. Deputy Darren O'Rourke.
There's a commitment in the programme for government for the future of the aviation sector on page 25. But at the minute there's contradicting and conflicting advice to people which undermines the aviation sector and confidence in it and in the public health effort. And I mean, there's planes taking off, but the advice is for no non-essential foreign travel, and it's proposed to extend this, I believe, with the publication of a green list on Monday. I think this policy is incoherent, it's contradictory and it's confused, and it has a very significant impact on people who have package holidays and flights booked abroad. So I want to know from the Tánaiste what protections he will provide for consumers. Will he call on the airlines to allow people to reschedule for free or to provide vouchers or refunds as appropriate?
Tánaiste.
Thanks.
Sorry, Deputy Murnan on the same matter.
Tánaiste, I mean, the Irish public, they really need clarity this summer when it comes to travel. It might be the message that all non-essential travel is not advised. It might also be the message that anyone coming to Ireland should isolate for 14 days. But in practice, Irish consumers are about to lose massive amounts of money because flights are still running, hotels abroad are open, and we are seeing large amount of non-isolating tourists come here and wander around the country. First, you have the issue of this, the money Irish consumers are losing, money they could be spending in their local economy, and second, the issue of the amount of flights coming from abroad. Tánaiste, we might pride ourselves on policing by cooperation, but we cannot encourage policing by civilians. There's so much anger out there, and I don't, Tánaiste, I was listening to you there answering other questions. I don't think you realise the anger that is out there. I mean, are we looking now at enforcement? Are we looking at protocols here? What are the follow-ups? Have there been fines? Like, we could be looking at another
Deputy,
surge.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Tánaiste, if you could come back to me on these.
Please,
thank you.
Tánaiste. Sorry, who's Deputy O'Donoghue? You're offering on the same matter, are you?
Yeah, on the same. My issue here is Tánaiste, is frontline workers that have actually booked their holiday since last year, have paid money out for it. The flights are going, but under the government directive, they are told that they're not supposed to travel, so they're being responsible. They're not travelling, and if they do travel, they've been told that they have to stay off work for 2 weeks when they come back. And if they don't travel, they're losing the funds that they have paid, that they saved up for a whole year to go on holidays. So on both sides, the frontline workers that kept us safe through all this are being penalised if they do, and are being penalised if they don't.
Thank you. Deputy McNamara, can I call you now? Because
yes,
I should have called my apologies.
Thank you.
I should have called you earlier.
Tánaiste, legislation is imminent to push back phase 4 because of the rise in transmission rate, or the R rate. That will affect rural pubs, as we've heard, but it will also affect sporting events, weddings, family events right across the country. Tánaiste, would you accept that the R rate in Dublin is now running at twice the level that it is for the rest of the country, and that it's no longer appropriate to treat the country as one region, that we need in this legislation to differentiate between places where there's a different R rate, as almost every other country in the world is now doing, and certainly every country in Europe is doing? I'm asking, will the legislation next week differentiate between Dublin, where the R rate is twice the level of the rest of the country, with regard to the restrictions which are proportionate and necessary?
Thank you, Deputy. Tánaiste.
Thanks, Deputy. Legislation next week won't, but I don't rule out the possibility down the line of having different rules for different regions in different parts of Ireland. But it isn't straightforward. You know, if we open the pubs in one part of Ireland, you will see people move from one part of Ireland to the other, to the place where the restrictions are less restrictive. So we need to bear that in mind as well. You know, counties in Ireland are not like states in Australia or even Länder in Germany. We're a small country. It's very easy to get around quickly. So if we do have different restrictions in different areas, we need to bear in mind that there may be pull factors which actually bring the virus into the area. So we have to bear that in mind. I do want to thank deputies for raising the issue of international travel. The government needs to clarify this, and we will on Monday. There have been, to a certain extent, mixed messages from government and NEFIT on this. We will clarify this on Monday. But just to be clear here, the message from government at the moment is that we're asking people not to engage in any non-essential travel off the island. If anyone is coming into the island for any reason, they are being asked to restrict their movements, not self-isolate, not quarantine, restrict their movements for 14 days. And the only exceptions are people who work on planes, in boats, or diplomats. It applies to everyone. We will come up with a list called a green list on Monday, which will be a list of countries with a similar incidence of the virus to us or lower, and the advice, logically, for people travelling to and from those countries will be different.
That concludes questions on promised legislation, and we will be starting next week with a clean sheet. We move now to item number 4A, which is a ban on rent increases bill 2020, and I call on Deputy Eoin O'Brien to move for leave to introduce the bill.
I so move, Ceann Comhairle.
Agreed. It's agreed that the bill be introduced. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Ceann Comhairle. Ceann Comhairle, rents are too high. There are too many people paying too much money to keep a roof over their heads. Since 2016, when the last government's housing strategy Rebuilding Ireland was introduced, rents across the state have increased by an astonishing 40%. Average asking rates across the state are now €1,400 per month. And in Dublin, over the same period, the situation is much, much worse. Rents have increased an astonishing 70%, and asking rents in Dublin City and County are now €2,000 per month. It is €7,500 a year more expensive to rent in Dublin today than when Rebuilding Ireland was first launched. Now, while COVID-19 has shifted the focus of the debate onto emergency measures to protect renters, the deeper structural problems remain. Research by the Economic and Social Research Institute shows that 70% of workers in the lower 25% of earnings have high housing costs, paying up to 40% of their take-home pay on rent. And these are people who are not eligible for HAP or other rental supports. Even those who can access such social housing supports, the impact of high rents means high top-up payments in addition to their differential rent to the council. For example, the gap between HAP rates in Dublin and market rent is now €700 a month for a family, and an astonishing €900 a month for a single person. The impact of high rents on people is immense, having to choose in some instances between rent, heat and food, having to work longer hours or in some cases second jobs, having to put off having children or buying a home, unable to save for a deposit or indeed save for a rainy day. And at its very hardest edge, it increases poverty and forces some families and single people into homelessness. While we urgently need the government to extend the COVID-19 ban on rent increases, and I have to say it's astonishing that the Cabinet made a decision on this yesterday, but it has yet to be announced, given the huge anxiety among renters and indeed landlords across the state. We also need to deal with the underlying problem of high rents. And the bill that I'm introducing today would seek to ban all rent increases for existing and new tenancies for a period of 3 years. It would apply to existing tenancies at the rate that they're currently being charged, and all new tenancies on the basis of the local Residential Tenancies Board rent index for that area and for that property size. The ban would be reviewed annually and automatically expire at the end of 3 years. Of course, if the government, as Sinn Féin has said before, we will complement this measure with the refundable tax credit, putting a month's rent back in every renter's pocket, as well as a major investment in affordable cost rental accommodation on public land, with rents between €700 and €900 per month. Now, when we introduced a similar piece of legislation at the end of the last Dáil, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael said it would deter future investment and that it would be unconstitutional. Institutional investment in the private rental sector benefits from record high rents and excessively generous tax breaks. So I have to say preventing rents from increasing any further would have no impact on current levels of investment. Restrictive interpretations of the Constitution are, in my view, too often used as a fig leaf by government who do not have the political will to act. And while the government, of course, takes the advice of the Attorney-General, the government should also listen to the country's leading constitutional law experts. When the government claimed that our last bill was unconstitutional, David Kenny, Assistant Professor of Law at Trinity College Dublin, one of the authors of the country's leading textbooks on the Constitution, said, and I quote, "There is an argument that the rent freeze bill violates constitutional property rights, but it is not at all clear that this argument would succeed. There is a good chance that, in deference to the Oireachtas judgment and the scale of the housing crisis, that the courts would uphold the bill. Indeed, I cannot think of any Supreme Court precedent on property rights in the last 20 years that would suggest that the courts would invalidate a measure such as the one under deliberation." Rachel Walsh, again Assistant Professor at Law at Trinity College Dublin, said, and I quote, "Where a clear objective is identifiable for a restriction of the exercise of property rights that plausibly secures the common good and social justice and is procedurally fair, there is every chance such legislation surviving constitutional balance." Ultimately, of course, it is the courts that would decide, so the real question is whether the government has the political will to stand up for renters and go all the way to the courts to protect them from excessive rents. The ban on rent increases Bill 2020 that I am introducing today is reasonable, proportionate, fair and, most importantly, absolutely necessary to protect hundreds of thousands of hard-pressed renters, and I commend it to the House.
Thank you very much, Deputy O'Brien. Tánaiste, is this bill being opposed?
Not opposed, Ceann Comhairle.
The bill is not being opposed. Therefore, the motion for leave to introduce is agreed. Can I ask Deputy O'Brien to move that the second stage be taken in private members' time?
So move.
Is that agreed? Agreed. Well, le sin tá go nó na maidine déanta agus lachamid susar fed dahat nó méid gur maithagah.